All right, question is where are the proportioning valves located on the Cherokee and Grand Cherokee? On the left frame rail at the rear of the vehicle, that's A, and the combination valve, which would be like your, that's the rear brake outlet ports in the HCU, or none of the above. Okay, the proportioning valves are going to, actually when you apply the brakes, they keep the back brakes from sliding.
From locking up.
Yeah, see what I'm saying? Because one of the things you don't ever want is for your back brakes to lock up very easily, because if you're in a curve on a rainy, if you're on a rainy or an icy curve, and you, let's say a deer runs across and you have to hit the brakes, when you hit the brake, you want the front brakes to stop you first. You don't want the back brakes to lock up and go into a skid. That's my take on proportioning valve. So basically, you're going to prevent the rear brakes from getting any fluid pressure until the front ones have got all they need. Now, there are height sensing proportioning valves that you may have seen and didn't know what you were looking at under these small pickup trucks and under that, I think that Mercury Sable's got it on there too. The heavier the vehicle is loaded, the more brake pressure it allows to go to the back. If you put a bunch of bags of fertilizer or something in the trunk of that Mercury Sable or on the back of that pickup truck, it actually got a little lever and a spring that's hooked to that proportioning valve, and as it changes its angle, it lets more fluid go to the rear brakes. It sort of opens up and gives it more pressure and volume back there. So this particular one is located in the combination valve. In the combination valve. You see anything in there about the combination valve in that handout? In the combination valve. And combination valve is, there's a metering valve and a proportioning valve in there, combination valve there together. Now hang on to that handout because you're liable to see some questions on your final exam out of that, and don't be crying in your soup if you don't have the handout. Although I do try to put the handouts in PDF format on that computer right over there, and in some of the other computers too. Where are the inlet and outlet valves located? Now if you think about it, that's not a hard question. What is the purpose of the inlet and the outlet valves on an ABS system? Remember what we were talking about before when we were talking about ABS? You got an inlet and outlet valve. Your hydraulic control unit has got brake fluid pressure coming in, and then it's going out the wheels. That's going to simplify this real, coming from your master cylinder. It's going through here, and it's going to have some little solenoids here that are controlled. Now, they've got slightly different names for these things. You remember the Ford has got the isolation and dump, huh?
Isolation.
Yeah, isolation and dump. So isolation would be to stop fluid from going to that wheel. We're going to stop fluid from going to that wheel. Why? Because it's starting to slide. We don't want it to slide, so we're going to stop the fluid from going to the field, and then we've got an outlet valve that basically, if this hydraulic control unit needs to put fluid back out there, it's going to send it through this outlet valve over to it. And this outlet valve, or like the dump valve on the Ford, actually drops the fluid pressure at that wheel until it starts to roll again. And that's what you're feeling, whenever you're feeling this thing up under your foot when you're hitting the brake. You ever hit a pedal do that? So they're in the hydraulic control unit. They're actually going to be in the HCU, basically. That's an extremely simplified illustration there. On Cherokee, which of the following conditions will cause the brake warning lamp to illuminate? A communication failure between the cab and the BCM. What's the cab? Controller anti-lock brake. That's basically like the ABS module. And the body control module is BCM. B, fluid pressure imbalance between the front and rear brakes. C, low level of brake fluid. Or D, none of the above. Actually, it's going to be a fluid pressure imbalance between the front and rear brakes. You see that? Now, according to the people that put this test together, B is the right answer. Low brake fluid level on just about every car out there is going to cause the ABS module to, ABS red brake light to burn too. All right. And by the way, there is a bug planted on that Ranger for this ABS. You've already been there, so don't say a word, okay? On that Ranger, you know, if you might notice when you mash the park brake, the red brake light comes on, and then right after that, the yellow ABS light comes on. And that's never supposed to happen, but there's a bug planted to make it happen, and that's what that works. If you just cranked it up without ever hitting the park brake, or if the park brake ain't mashed on it, then you don't ever see the yellow ABS light. But if you mash the park brake and the red brake light comes on, it'll pop that light on. And when you get sharp enough to analyze why that happens, then you've actually done something. You know, I wrote an article about it for Motor Age back in back in July of 2000, I think it was. But anyway, that 3 is B. 4 is during ABS operation, when is the pump motor initially run? During ABS operation, when it has detected that you're starting to slide the wheels and it wants you to stop sliding the wheels, or it wants the wheels to stop sliding, when does it run the pump? You'll see that in your handout now. Don't be lazy. During the hold cycle, think about it. You got a build cycle, you got a decay cycle, and you got a hold cycle. That's when it is initially run, according to that. If you see a different answer in there, I want to know about it. Number 5, wheel speed sensor circuitry is checked by the cab, CAB, during which self-test cycle? Number 5, is it drive-off cycle, start-up cycle, drive cycle, or none of the above?
Number 4, the build cycle?
And so actually number 4 is going to be D, the whole cycle. You got it? I mean, because these people that typed all of this stuff for all the programs for the ABS and stuff, they have to consider a lot of stuff that we don't ever think about, you know, whenever they're doing this, and they do a whole lot of testing before they ever put that thing on, before you ever put it under somebody's foot doing any work, you know, they're going to check it. Wheel speed sensor circuitry is checked by the cab during which self-test cycle? You see anything in your handout about self-test cycles? There's a drive-off cycle, a start-up cycle, a drive cycle.
Is it a cab?
Which self-test cycle? See, it's constantly, it's kind of like your continuous monitor on your engine controller. There's some things that it's looking at, and it chooses when to look at them, which is pretty good stuff. Actually, it does it on the drive-off cycle. Now, I would think it would do it on the startup cycle, because a lot of them send a bias voltage out there. This is how that works, and I've talked about that a little bit before. You know, your module, they've got all these solenoids and stuff that it's fooling with, and it's got wheel speed sensors out here, you know, that it's looking at on every wheel. And what it does is it's got 2 wires hooked to that thing, and it sends voltage out, and it looks for it to come back. It does that on everything. It sends voltage out, looks for it to come back. And when it doesn't have that solenoid operational, it's not going to have any ground on that circuit. It'll be like it's using the little sides that it would ordinarily ground it as a meter. So it shoots voltage out there, and then it come back. If it didn't come back, you've either got a wire that's cut, or you've got a bad...
Can I use number 1 day for a few minutes?
Anyway, it'll have either a bad solenoid or it'll have a cut wire. And that's basically what you got. That's how you got to think about that. If you got something that's showing, let me answer you with this. This is pretty darn important right here. But you got to be thinking the right way about this. Incidentally, I need Lawrence to try to fix the brake lights on the Ranger today. That'll be a good thing for you to do. The brake light's been out on the Ranger for a while.
Yeah, it beat me up one time.
Well, that's not too terribly complicated. All right, so let's just simplify this with, let's say we've got a solenoid. All right, we got a relay up here that's basically going to operate the module, right? Well, I'm going to take that back. Usually that'll be hooked up right here, and this will have B minus, and that'll have B plus. So this actually flips back and forth from ground to power on ABS systems. It's real strange how they do that. All right, now, this wakes the module up, right? And let's say that it's throwing you a code. Let's say you've got 2 solenoids, or, we're only going to put 2. There's more than that. And let's say that it's throwing you a code for that one. Okay, so what do you do first? The first thing I want to know is which wire is in this connector. I'm going to find what my connector is. I'm going to find my connector. And I'm going to find out which one of these wires in this connector go to this solenoid. That's what I'm going to do. I mean, this is how I'm going to do it. Actually, the easiest plane to access is where you're going. Usually, this is fairly easy to get to. Usually. In some cases, it's not. I'm going to unplug it. I'm going to find out that these 2 wires right here are the ones that are going to that solenoid. I know that solenoid is supposed to have, let's say that that solenoid is supposed to have 6 ohms. I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to say, I know that these wires, I'm going to unplug this from the ABS unit, and I'm going to make sure that that go from right here to right there with my meter. If I see 6 ohms, to make darn sure I know what I'm doing, I'm going to have, hey, Joe, come watch my meter for me, and he's going to hold this on there. Or either that, I'm going to have him go to this and unplug it. Got it? Now, that's not always easy to do. This really works better for wheel speed sensors than it does anything else, because usually your hydraulic control unit and your module are built together. See, so it's going to be difficult to, unplug a solenoid. So let's just call this a wheel speed sensor. Now let's change this reading to 1200 ohms. All right, I'm going to go from here to here, and I'm going to read. If it says 1200 ohms, I'm going to say, hey, that sounds pretty good. If it's one of these kind that creates a signal like that, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click my meter over to AC volts, and I'm going to have the car up off the ground. And I'm going to say, plug that sensor back in, because he unplugged it, and I saw this 1200 go away. That way I know I'm on the right sensor. Now plug it back in. He plugs it back in. I say, now spin that wheel as fast as you can. And when he does, I'm going to be watching my meter to see if I'm getting AC volts. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll understand what I'm trying to tell you to do. You're checking the circuit from the module all the way out here, all at one time. So you're not having to go all the way down the circuit. Now, the caveat is, let's say that I know I'm on the right wires, and I've checked it, but I don't see 1200 ohms. Because see, I'm unplugged right here, and I'm basically, because here's my connector, and I'm basically checking right there with my meter. All right, so if I've unplugged that and I'm checking with my meter and I don't get 1200 ohms, then I'm going to see if there's any other connectors in that line. If there are other connectors in that line, I'm going to make sure they're okay. Remember, particularly on front wheels, and I've seen this on several different cars, the wheels are being turned back and forth all the time, and that brake sensor wire is about to do lots of bending, and it tends to break sometimes. And it gets kind of hot under there too. So, the heat makes the wire hard and all that. So anyway, if you don't see the 1200 ohms when you check it here, you got to start checking your wires in. Well, let's unplug from the sensor. And now we're going to check from here to there to see if that one reads. If that reads good, we're actually checking the wires.
Right.
And see if it's broken, a broke wire. And we check from there to there and see if it's a broke wire. We can also check right here on the sensor itself to see if we read 1200. See, there's a lot of different ways you can go on that in any order you want to. Whatever's easiest, that's how you're going to do that. Here's one I had at Ford when I was working over there at the Ford place. We got to the point, sometimes if if your warranty claims get up a little too much, there's 25 guys in a shop who are probably going to have warranty claims to go up a little out of control. So the guy calls and says, we got to call and, make sure that we get hotline assistance when we think we need to put a $1,200 module on it. So I call over here and I say, look, I've got a good sensor. I got good wires. My module is telling me I got a bad sensor when I'm getting a signal and I got the good wires. He said, well, let's take the sensor from the right front and the left front, unkey them out of your module connector, and swap them around. plug it back in. Now it's going to be looking at the opposite wheels. If the code you're getting for a bad sensor stays the same, we'll know that your module is bad. But if it moves, see what I'm saying? If now it's reporting the other sensor because you moved them, then you know there's something wrong out there. See what I'm saying? That is a sensible, easy thing to do, really, and all that. So, and what I got to do is, as we go with our bugs on our anti-lock brake systems, I got to make them harder and harder and harder until you finally find one that you can't fix. You know what I mean? That good? How come everybody's just looking at me when I say that? All right. This one instructor told me that time when I told him, I said, sometimes when I'm bugging these cars for these guys in engine performance, I'll take them and I'll make them skip on the same cylinder for about 4 or 5 different reasons. So every time they find something and fix it, it's still skipping. You know, bend the plug shut, you know, foul the injector up, or, you know, this, that, other, unkey the thing from the PCM or do a connector, whatever. And so everything they do, they think they fixed it and it's still skipping. And that instructor, that other automotive instructor said, man, you just all hard and everything, you know. But anyway, I want it to be harder here than it is out there so you can just sail, you know what I mean? But this is the long and the short. If you can't fix stoplights, you ain't making it. You better get that. You better get a handle on that. All right. All right. Now then, let's see where we at here. Number 6, in the drive-off cycle, if the cab receives a brake switch input before the vehicle reaches 16 miles an hour, the test will be postponed until the vehicle reaches what speed?
40 miles per hour.
You done found that one, didn't you? 40 miles an hour. One of the things that I used to see on these Ford Aerostars is they would say, my ABS light comes on when I hit 40 miles an hour. And then I switch off the car, and when I start it back up, it's just fine until I reach 40 miles an hour. So what I figured out on those, they have orange turn signals and red stoplights, right? Mm-hmm. If both stoplight bulbs are blown,
It's going to throw the ABS.
yeah, the ABS is confused because, and it's interesting to me how this thing works. On cruise control, and a lot of times on ABS systems, your stoplight bulb has got ground, and you know, it's got a little bulb here. Your stoplight bulb has got ground, and then it's got a switch that's going to close and cause the stoplights to come on. Okay, it's going to actually have 2 bulbs on that because of the fact that the turn signals are not the same bulb as the stoplight bulb. It's actually going to be looking for ground. In other words, the ABS module is tied in right here, and it can, as long as those brakes are not applied, it sees this ground.
Oh, okay.
That's what cruise control does too. And so if you apply the brakes and you're bringing your 12 volts, you know, there's your fuse or in there, and your 12 volts goes and burns the light. But this ABS or this cruise control module or whatever, it couldn't care less about voltage. All it's looking at is ground. You pop this bulb and you pop the other one just like it, you've lost your ground. All right, so now the module is saying, wait a minute, this knothead is going 40 miles an hour. I know he ain't got his foot on the brake. It thinks you've got the brake applied, but when you hit 40 miles an hour, it's saying something's wrong. He ain't got his foot on the brake going 40 miles an hour. I'm turning the, you know. That's like a body computer on some of these, like on that Ranger out there, if you could make it happen. That little gem module on there, it actually will turn off the interior lights. Like if it's been triggered to turn on the interior lights because the door is open, and you hit about 30 miles an hour on that, it turns off the interior light because it knows he ain't driving 30 miles an hour with the door open. There's something wrong here. So if you open the door on one of these cars and you hit about 30 miles an hour with the door open, the light goes out on the inside. It's a logic thing. You see what I mean? Somebody will say, okay, if they reach this, if this condition's met and that condition's met, then you turn this off. I mean, that's how those programs are written, you know. All right. So that's going to be 40 miles an hour. In a latching trouble code, ABS is disabled, but can be restored with the same drive cycle if the fault disappears. That's false. And I got a light that just came on without warning. That's usually whenever I call Gene in here to fix it, it looks like that. Okay. It's come on. On minivans with traction control, isolation valves are, 7 is actually false. The same drive cycle, meaning you haven't parked it and switched it off and restarted it. If you park it, switch it off, and restart it, you're in a different drive cycle. Got it?
Yeah, because it restarts every time, right?
Yeah, it restarts every time. All right. And on minivans with traction control, isolation valves are used to do what? Prevent braking pressure from being applied to the rear wheels. We talked about that earlier. That's actually going to be a C. Number 9, Technician A says if the rear tone wheels on minivans are damaged, they can be replaced as an individual component. Technician B says that only the rear tone wheels on front wheel drive minivans can be replaced. Technician A is the one. The rear tone wheels on minivans are damaged. Tell you about those tone wheels. There was a Thunderbird that this guy was talking about one time that he worked at Lincoln Mercury, and the little tone wheel was a little stamped steel thing that was pressed on the hub, and it would sometimes they get loose. That's not good. You know why it ain't good? He was coming up, the customer said sometimes the brakes just wouldn't stop the car. So he's driving this thing on Oak Street over there. He's coming up to a traffic light. The tone wheel starts dancing around loose when he's applying the brake, and it actually stops turning because it gets jammed on the sensor. And the brakes, it's trying to do an anti-lock brake event, and he couldn't stop the car. He just went right on through the intersection. It was scary as all get out. He was like, oh, you know, but I mean, basically when you pull that off, that little tone wheel just fell off of there. You know, it was a bad design. And there was a guy that was managing Larry's Barbecue said his Lincoln was doing the same thing. And I says, take it up to Lincoln Mercury and see Bobby up there. He'll take care of that for you. You know, but that Larry's Barbecue guy was a little hard to get along with. I was just having a barbecue sandwich. I don't want to talk to him about Lincoln. But anyway, all that was, that's what it was. But what happened was he went up there, and he didn't talk to the guy I told him to talk to. Initially, they put a brake booster on it and all kinds of other stuff. Then they found out that that tone wheel was loose, you know. Duh, you know, so anyway, there you go. So that number 9 is an A. The tone wheels on minivans are damaged. They can be replaced as an individual component. And finally, number 10, when bleeding the brake system on vehicles with ABS, the DRB3 scan tool is used to do what? It cycles the valves on the HCU. You know, I gave you that sheet a while back about special procedures for ABS. Now, here it is. On the Chrysler van, the Dodge van out there, what you've got on that Dodge van for the rear wheel speed sensor is you got a 2-wire sensor. It does not create a sine wave, okay? You understand what I'm saying? Think about what I'm saying here. 12 volts coming from the ABS module, you got a ground. On this 12 volt line, if you go on that 12 volt line, it is a square wave generator. That sensor generates a square wave signal. You can read it on a scope. If you turn it slow, you can read it on a voltmeter. So if you go into that 12 volt line, and I use a paper clip to back probe it. I don't want to pierce the wire if I can get out of it. Back probe it, hook between ground and that 12 volt line, and if you turn that wheel slow, you'll see that voltage go up and down. That's how that is. It's just a little bit. It's actually, the module's actually measuring 7 to 14 milliamps. But you can also get it, hook up to it with your volts. Now with 7 to 14 milliamps, you would need to interrupt this and measure it with a little amp meter, right? But you don't want to have to do that if you can get out of it. It's a lot of trouble. Let's just go ahead and back probe our connector. When I say back probe the connector, you know where the wire goes into the connector? You're going to go in there beside it with a paper clip. You can just go right down in there and make contact with that terminal without damaging anything. And when you turn that thing through, I put my little scope on it. I got a picture of it. I put my little scope on it, and it makes the prettiest little square wave signal you ever saw. Because you can measure that. But be aware of the fact that if you look at the anti-lock brake wheel speed sensors on some of these, sometimes your scan tool, no matter who made it, will lie to you and tell you the left one is the right one and the right one's the left one. And what happened to me was I was working on the school van. I mean, the that Dodge Caravan, and my scan tool told me the one on the right was a bad sensor, and I got a sensor for the right and popped it in there, and nothing changed. And it wouldn't even pull codes on that one. And Chrysler ABS is not too familiar. I mean, not
That's
too.
what you talking about on Facebook this weekend?
Yeah. Well, no, that particular one. Wait a minute. I had a lot of stuff that popped on. No, I was showing you a fuel pump motor on that one.
Yeah, no, but you talking about something with Chrysler too?
Maybe I probably was. I always there's stuff that from my YouTube channel that goes all the way through to Facebook automatically. That's probably something I'm talking about. I remember what you're talking about. That was something else. That was somebody asked me a question and I answered it. Is what I did. So that was I don't know why that answer went through Facebook, but it did. But anyway, that's the that little signal right there. You cannot take an ohm meter and measure that sensor and find nothing.
Because it's too small.
It just, well, you're not even going to see anything. It's got an electronic, MRE in it. It's a little magnetic resonance, element. And so it's actually, as them little teeth go past that thing. And why do they do this? They do it because they want this thing to be able to read the vehicle speed even when it's almost completely stopped. And on the ones that make these signals like this, that signal gets weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker as you stop. And it gets to the point where you can't read it anymore because it's too little. But on these that are doing a square wave, it just makes a square wave longer, but it can still tell when the vehicle moving. They want it to be able to read it at parking lot speeds. That's what they're going to do. Some of these brake systems have got what they call a hill hold feature. It knows because of the accelerometers and whatnot, and the sensors have got it in when you're sitting on a hill. And when you get ready to take off, it's holding the brakes. And when you get ready to move forward, it releases the brakes so you can go forward. You know how you have to do on your stick transmission? You got to have it. What I used to do, teaching my brother how to drive, you hold the park brake. And then you release it as you go. You do the hill hold. Now that's whenever you had a park brake down here between the seats, on the Volkswagen. So anyway. All right, anybody got any questions about any of that? You had to absorb a lot of information. Do not lose that handout. Don't just leave it laying on the table, okay?
I'm going to put mine in my pocket.